Hello there. The first video, the first chapter is going to be dedicated to king safety. So a very important strategic concept. Since you start to play chess, you are told to castle, you are told to take great care of your king safety, because even if you manage to collect pawns and pieces and secure a great material advantage, you are still going to be, if you are still going to be checkmated, then you lose the game. So this is generally the first and most important strategic concept I'm going to discuss with you. In particular, I'm going to focus on well, how not to play, especially in the opening, and how it can easily backfire when you don't take sufficient care of your king. And in the following games, I'm going to show you quite, I think, interesting remedies if you realize that your king is in jeopardy. So we're going to start with a game played between two less known players, Nowacki and Sulik. I think Croatian players or former Yugoslavian players. This is not that relevant. What matters the most is how those players played the game. So there was e4, c6, knight c3, d5, knight f3. There is such a variation of the Caracan defense. Bishop g4, h3, bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, e6. All of this is normal. d4. People also play with d3. I think this is a bit more fashionable right now, and then oftentimes you see even plans including g4 and bishop g2. White generally castles kingside. You could also see g3, a bit more modest. I don't feel an expert in this line, but this is at least something I've seen, and I know this should generally be playable. So d4, this was met with d takes e4, apparently a thematic move in Caracan. Of course, it's not going to, it would not be a tragedy for black to allow e5, but at the same time black is sort of obliged to find a move right now, and while knight f6 could theoretically be played, it will run into e5 with a tempo, so possibly this is not optimal. Bishop b4 could be played, but at the same time you don't really know if the bishop belongs to b4 right now. So d takes e4, again, another approaches were available to black, but I think d takes e4 is at least a reasonable move. And I also imagine that black sort of took it for granted that white is going to recapture with the queen, because that move recaptures the pawn and also protects the pawn on d4, because as you see right now this pawn is hanging. Unfortunately, what black failed to realize is that chess is not mathematics. 2 plus 2 doesn't have to add up to 4. And, well, even though some moves seem to be straightforward, they are not forced. And white chose a much more aggressive approach. Knight takes e4. And obviously the critical move is queen takes d4. So knight takes e4 is a legitimate pawn sacrifice. And, well, of course, white is asking black to provoking black to take the pawn, because if that happens, and this is actually the game continuation, white is going to have tremendous lead in development, and of course he's going to expect huge compensation for the sacrifice material. And throughout this chapter, and also the well, this video and the upcoming one, you're going to see a common pattern. Whenever you need to compare two or more possibilities, and there is one or more which is going to lead to you having not really a safe king, king being exposed, being vulnerable, then you need to pay specific attention to that line and just make sure that you don't risk too much. Here queen takes d4, it still looks okay, provided that black is going to catch up in development real quick. This didn't happen, because after queen takes d4, white went bishop d3. It's not really forcing, but it doesn't have to be. It's at this point just deciding what is more important, having a pawn advantage or a huge lead in development with most pieces centralized and potentially a target in the form of the queen on d4. Because if white is just going to castle in the very next move, likely we are going to see bishop e3 or bishop f4 or other moves that would attack the black queen. And the question is if black is going to have enough time to consolidate his pieces, his position, so that at the end of the day the king is safe. As you know, in the opening, you are supposed to do three things. Fight for the center, develop your minor pieces, and castle. If you are not going to do at least one of those three, well, you have to make sure you do all of them. If you don't do at least one of them, then you are likely going to suffer. So it's okay to grab a pawn or two, provided that you still have enough time to have some presence in the center. The more, the better. And first and foremost, secure the king's safety. Here, black's strategy is very risky, and it will backfire. Knight f6. So black does develop a piece. Bishop e3. Queen takes b2, kingside castle. So what we see here on the board is black enjoying a two-pawn advantage, but is it really worth it? This is the question you need to ask yourself all the time. Is it worth it to have two pawns advantage, but no real development? Right now, okay, and the queen is on b2, but okay, so this is the green piece, the happy piece. Knight f6 is also sort of happy. But these minor pieces, and especially the king, well, while the pieces highlighted in red, they are certainly unhappy because they are not involved at all. The king highlighted in yellow, this king is just very vulnerable. It's in the center, and you can already expect white just playing rook b1 in the very next move, and the attack starts. You cannot allow yourself to have the king in the center, especially in an open position. In closed ones, there are certain situations where you can allow this to happen. In open ones, such as here, this is really a bad strategy. So black took on e4, bishop takes e4, and what we have here is a very it's a picturesque situation. We're on move 11, and the only piece that black has developed, that black developed and black maintains it developed, is the queen on b2. On the other hand, white is down to pawns, but every single piece he has is either already involved in the game, or it's just one move away from being involved in the game. So clearly black is going to pay the price for his bad strategy. He played queen f6, and of course, while this is logical from black's perspective, because obviously exchanging is going to decrease the risk of the black king being checkmated, or at least falling under a serious attack. So this makes perfect sense for black, and at the same time white shouldn't go for it. White should not exchange queens, because with the queens on the board it will be much easier to attack, and when you're down material you should generally not exchange. You should try to find your counter chances with the more pieces on the board. Then it's much easier to construct tactical ideas, make threats, and put pressure on your opponent. So white chose queen g3, very logical move to me, preparing bishop g5, queen c7, such moves. And black opted for knight a6. This looks like a natural move, but I feel it's already a bit too late for black to really get back into the game. And also, if you have to develop your knight on a6, it's a perfect sign something is not exactly correct with your position. Here I assume the intention was to cover the c7 square, because this infiltration would have been quite dangerous, to be honest, because the pawn on b7 is also not protected, not to mention the very simple threat of queen c8 check, and the black king is very vulnerable. So knight a6 had to be played, but it's a sad necessity. Rook a to b1. I've been mentioning this in my other courses. Initiative is the key to success, is the preliminary step of the attack. It's not really the attack, because you don't really have a clear target, a defined target. It's rather a series of moves where you force your opponent to react, and as a result, further weaknesses might occur on the board. Black is under pressure, he needs to react, he does not have time to develop his pieces and solve his own problems. And at this point, the very simple threat of taking on b7 forces black to retreat to e7 with the queen. And why is rook a to b1 such a strong move? Well, first of all, we develop another piece, make sure that all of our pieces are happy and involved, and also this bishop on f8 is currently blocked by the queen on e7, which means black is going to have to spend at least an additional move, at least to prepare the development of the bishop, and this is just too time consuming. White played rook f to d1. There is no threat, but at the same time, it's not easy at all for white to develop, for black to develop. Sorry, of course, white does not need to develop anything anymore. All of his pieces are placed pretty much in the best possible way. So black played g6, and on one hand this is quite a natural move, because, well, you need to do something about your bishop. So if black has enough time to play bishop g7 and kingside castle, he will just clearly have the advantage. So it's to a degree it's a forcing move, because white needs to find a quick way to maintain the initiative, to create further threats, otherwise black is just going to consolidate. The drawback of this move is that, well, you already have, as black, an open diagonal here, so creating another open diagonal is not that great, because all of these squares, they are quite weak. It's a whole constellation of spots that could be utilized by white's pieces. Generally speaking, this is not advisable. If you have one open diagonal, probably you should develop the bishop on that diagonal. In this particular case, that seems impossible. So the game saw bishop g5, and this provokes and virtually forces f6. White went back. White didn't go back. He just played queen f3. White didn't go back with the bishop. And it's worth mentioning this move, because right now there is another threat, which is bishop takes c6. And this is actually a tactical justification of white's play, because if f takes g5 was played, then there's bishop c6, pawn takes b6 is forced, queen takes c6. Again, king f7 forced, and right now, of course, white could take the rook, but that allows bishop g7, and I don't believe I think this is not really clear if white still has the advantage, but instead it should still be possible to play rook d7, and I don't believe black can still hold everything, or possibly even rook b7. Both of these moves are very dangerous. Maybe even rook b7 is just a bit stronger. Then the queen is in danger, the rook and the knight. I can imagine white being able to take the queen for a rook and also the knight at the end of the day. So instead, in order not to fall for all of this, black just chose king f7. And this is a sign of rational thinking. If black just made one more defensive move, such as bishop g7, his position could be totally okay. So it also puts some pressure on white, because white needs to prove that there is sufficient attack, that the attack is dangerous, and it's a well-timed one. So from strategy, you can immediately switch to tactics. Without proper calculation, you can get you can have fantastic intuition as regards attacking chances. You can play as strong as Tal, but at the end of the day, you need to calculate. So while to a degree I consider attacking, in particular attacking the king, as a strategic concept, please note that attacking properly really requires a well-developed tactical ability. And this is what White really depicted here. It's not that this continuation was difficult to find, but it had to be found. So what White did here is bishop takes f6. Proving that the attack was well timed. If Black had already the bishop on g7, everything could be still just perfectly fine. Because that sacrifice would not work. Queen takes f6, rook d7, bishop e7, rook takes e7, everything comes by force with great speed. Rook takes b7. As a matter of fact, after rook e7, Black just resigned, but this prolongation of the line just depicts Black's problems. So this is how you're not supposed to play with Black. Let's just go back real quick. Everything started with this innocent looking capture of the pawn on d4. And whenever you're faced with such a position, it's always about asking yourself this really serious question. Is it worth it to take the pawn? Am I not putting my king into jeopardy? Am I sure that I will have enough time to consolidate my position and develop just on time to cancel? Because if you cancel, you're likely going to have at least a relatively safe position of the king, although not always. Okay, so in order not to make things too long, let's just conclude here. In the upcoming videos, you're going to see more examples of this immortal dilemma. Is it worth it?